going to be our first panel discussion. It's centered around indie development and the indie business, and looking at various ways that you can be involved in game development that aren't necessarily strictly starting a game company, making a game company, but then also looking at some of the other options that we have available. So joining us today, we have Jeremy, Adam, and Chase. I guess we'll go in that order. If you could just give a quick introduction about yourself.
Sure. My name is Jeremy Handel. I run a company called Handel Games. We're out of Cleveland. And actually, Handel Games is an offshoot from a previous company of mine, Handel Studio, which was an app studio, but we've now sort of decided to zero in on this idea of finding these independently produced board game ideas. I promise I didn't actually prompt him to ask that question about board games transitioning to digital in the last presentation. But basically, Kickstarter has sort of funded this new wave of board games. I'm sure here in Columbus you guys know all about that with Origins and all that. But so we're focused on helping those people bridge the gap by taking their innovative, cool board gaming ideas and bringing them over to digital platforms.
Cool. My name is Adam Schroeder. As the co-founder of FGL, previously known as Flash Game License, which is a marketplace and community that connects tens of thousands of developers with hundreds of companies that want to license their games or publish their games, all the way from Disney, Cartoon Network, down to just smaller indie guys that run websites like Armor Games or Congregate, Not Doppler, stuff like that.
Hi, I'm Chase Grozdina, and I'm the lead engineer for Open Realms Games. Currently, we are an indie startup business that we've been going through kind of the initial steps to create our business from the ground up. We've had a Kickstarter campaign currently on Steam, and we're working to basically get our name out there and become a successful indie company.
All right, I think that's actually a good segue, because you recently did a Kickstarter that was successful, and that's kind of started...
Well, 2 years ago, but
relatively in the development world. So why don't you talk a little bit about sort of the things you did to make yourself successful and how that's helped spur where you are right now?
Certainly, I mean, that's a very complicated topic. Getting the Kickstarter project out there was multi-beneficial to us. Not only did it help us get the funding for being able to spend the time in developing this, because as you know, working a full-time job, I can't spend all my time developing a game. So Kickstarter has given us that. But it also gave us a start into the community itself. The indie game community is actually fairly large, and there's a lot of people with a lot of interest. And just being out there has given us a lot of contacts, a lot of people who are interested, and also a lot of motivation for continuing to do what we do. I think to definitely in steps for being successful in that, honestly connecting with the community itself, trying to find out who you're actually supposed to speak to online. There's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of people with different interests, and I definitely think that one of the things that we did that were successful is trying to target specifically who we're making a game for and who we're trying to appeal to, because the gaming industry is an entertainment market, and that's how we thought about it.
Cool. So along the same lines, Adam, a lot of what you do is about building a community and trying to get people connected and focused in a particular area. But can you explain a little bit like how you might partner with somebody like Chase to get their product out, or to?
Yeah, I mean, FGL has, it's more a B2B business than, reaching out to the individual game players, although we have some new products that are kind of doing that. You would come to FGL for a huge number of possible solutions. I mean, we have an active community of developers that will beta test each other's games and provide feedback, so you can come to it at that state. There's collaborative forums where you can find artists to help you with games there. For the web game space, which was our roots, there's a whole model called sponsorships, where basically you would build a game, you would release it for free on the web, some other company would pay you money to brand the game and drive traffic back to their website. Amounts from $100 to $100,000, depending on how good the game was and how well they thought it would resonate. And then they would help, so that would get you some guaranteed money. Usually you could still have the mobile rights, so you could use that game to promote your mobile game if you have that out there. We have all sorts of companies that come to us that just want content So like if your game is listed with us and someone comes and says, hey, we have this new product, we need 50 games, we have a whole sort of marketplace where they can go through and shop for like licenses of games of different types. So just it's very easy and efficient. We have licensing solutions like we do. There's a lot of international developers we work with, and then when a big company wants to license a game here, they require all these levels of insurance and different paperwork stuff that they don't have. So we have a whole solution for that called Easy License, where we basically license it from the developer. We have the $3 million insurance policy and all the stuff they need to see, and just make it really efficient.
Oh, that's cool.
So and then our newest stuff is mobile, and it's basically it's geared towards indies. It's basically a platform that lets us operate games rather than just release and be done with them. Like the successful free-to-play games are just constantly looking at the data, iterating, growing the game, adapting the game based on what's good. But for an indie game, a simpler game, usually the motto is you make the game, you release it, and you just you're done, and you hope to see what happens. But even in that context, like if you're just simply like, okay, I want to monetize by ads, ad networks change all the time. Different games monetize in different way from different networks. Different demographic can get monetized better from one network versus another. So I mean, we found ways that we can double or triple ad revenue just by actively managing that process and implementing a bunch of different networks, constantly evaluating what works the best. So I mean, there's any number of ways that we could help make more money from your product, basically.
That's a good answer. Before I turn to Jeremy, though, you said something interesting. You mentioned resonate, like things that resonate. So what are you seeing right now from your experience are the kinds of games that are resonating with players, or in a financial sense? Like, what are the games that are drawing attention?
I mean, that's different per market. I mean, and I'm a little out of, like the web side is one part of our business. I'm focused on the mobile. So like in the web, there's always like one hot game type, like physics games were hot for a year, then tower defense came, and now, I mean, what's hot is mobile. And what genre, like, it changes all the time. I mean, it's just hidden object games are one that we're having a lot of success with lately, and that
Really?
kind of resonates well. I mean, it's really more focused, less on what's the current hit, but more what are the ways to sort of maximize the value. Like Android, for example, you think Google Play, or maybe you think Amazon. But there's also Nook, which is a significant market. It's declining. But then even beyond that, there's hundreds of other OEM Android stores that individually aren't really that valuable. But if you can efficiently distribute to all of them, you can get some extra revenue from your titles. And so we just work to kind of make it so the developer can focus more on the game, and we can help with the monetization and extract extra value efficiently.
Cool. So, Jeremy, you're running your own shop.
I am.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started and where you're at now?
Sure. So I actually started Handel Studio back in 2009, and my goal was really just to make every kind of app that I thought was neat. And we started with, we've done a to-do list app, which was pretty boring, but then we did a camera app, and eventually we sort of nuzzled up to games just a little bit, and we made a game called Uncle Slam, which is President on President Boxing. It's for iOS. It's available now, iPad and iPhone. And basically you pick your president, and then it's sort of a Rock'em Sock'em Robots style punch-out game. And that was sort of our learning process, because, if you've been going to all the panels and everything so far today, you've noticed that there's been a lot of discussion about business up here, and probably not so much about, why are games fun and how do we make games fun? And that's because at least for me, the most important lesson that I learned is that my most important job as a business runner is to keep my business running. And that's true for any sort of, it seems strange in the world of like entertainment business. There's always this constant push and pull, like the creative vision is this, but the business realities are this. And finding the way to balance the two of those can be very difficult. I failed to balance those with Uncle Slam. Uncle Slam lost an obscene amount of money that I will not tell you exactly how much. But I learned a lot about how you market a game, how not to market a game, and a lot of other things, which is what led me to where we are now, which is focusing in on games that have already proven out a market in some way, and that is on the board game side of things. We just went through a business accelerator up in Cleveland called the Launch House, really honing this idea of these small independent companies that are finding compelling gameplay on the tabletop, finding out if those make sense to bring over to digital, and if so, how do we do that efficiently? Especially the last presentation talked a lot about this. A game that used to cost $5 million with a team of 20 and 4 years can get done with 2 people in 6 months for $100,000 these days. Whether it's a question of the tools, the distribution, the licensing, all of these things are so much easier, faster, smaller, quicker now than they used to be. And so, the flip of that obviously becomes the glut. Everybody who's looked for, I'm bored, I'm going to go find an app on the App Store to play, a game on the App Store to play. You go looking and there's thousands. And you have no idea what's good. App discovery has become a huge issue, which is another reason why we figure if we focus in on games that already have some idea, some customer recognition, we can really capitalize on that. And more importantly, bring some of these compelling gameplay from the tabletop that some people might not even know exist. There's still, despite the fact that it's growing by leaps and bounds by like 20% every year, board games are still kind of a geek hobby. You don't see the kind of games I'm talking about in Toys R Us. And bringing those up in front of the 100 million people who have iPads and iPhones and Android tablets and Nexus 7s, those people are going to see these new interesting gameplay things that they might not have ever thought about because they've been too busy playing Candy Crush. So we're hoping to bring some of those really compelling, enjoyable, creative things in a good, solid, successful business way to this larger market. So,
all right. So all three of you have sort of tapped on this, and you just sort of hit on you can now make something for $100,000 over the course of 6 months. Our previous speaker, Jeremy, was talking about the tools you can use. The tools are all well and good, but, and this is a free question for any of you, where do you get the talent? Where do you find good partners to work with and people that are, you can have Unity sitting on your computer, but unless you have a good partner that's willing to work with you this endeavor. So what do you look for when you're partnering or looking for employees or those kind of things?
I think that's the trick. Personally, from my own experience, we haven't had to hire on any employees, but we have had to work with other people for asset creation and things of that nature. And it's not a cut and dry process. You have to go out there, you have to look at a lot of different people, and you just have to end up talking with them, seeing the stuff that they do, seeing if they're the right personality. I've met a lot of people who can actually do very good work, but they're very hard to work with, and they don't like doing things in particular ways. And sometimes we work through it. Sometimes people, we've had to part ways because of that. But it's an ongoing process. Obviously, it's one of those where the best thing you can do for yourself is just expand your own network, expand who you know and who you can talk to, especially at a game developers conference like this.
Yeah, to follow on what you're talking about here, this indie mindset, I know, at least for me, when I first started thinking about the idea of making games, the indie mindset, and especially when you couple that with what I like to call the Midwest mindset, which is that games are a really fun hobby. Now I'm going to close that down and go to work. Those are not mutually exclusive things. There's no reason why I want to work on a game can't be a career path in Ohio. I'm working really hard to change that. I know when I'm out there looking for funding and I'm out there looking for partners, I have a really excellent group of Cleveland game developers, raise your hand, who are all really working to actually start publishing their own games. Get them out there, start selling them. Like if we can turn this into an actual viable first job and not the thing I do in my free time when I'm not, working IT at some big corporation, that's the mindset that I think we need to get into more here in the Midwest, in Cleveland, in Columbus, in Indianapolis, or wherever. Because the community, especially as you can see now, I think that Steve Castro was blown away by the number of people that are showing up for this thing. The interest is here. The people are here. The talent is here. It's really just a question of getting out there and meeting these people. Go to meetup.com, find a group that is working on these things. Come to events like this. We threw one in Cleveland back in March. Just keep your ear to the ground. Keep listening and looking, because the people who want to make these things are out there. And especially if you can crack that Midwest mindset of saying oh, it's just a hobby. It's something I'm going to do by myself in my bedroom at night because it gives me some fun enjoyment. get out there and start building things. It's never been easier to put a game out there and start making money. And whether you're going to make a lot of money or not is yet to be seen, but you're never going to know until you actually get it out there. And the more you do that, the more people will start to find each other, I think.
All right, I couldn't have summed it up any better. So I think that a lot of people that have come to this expo and they're interested in this thing is, it's one thing to say, okay, make something, but like, what are the expectations when you're just getting started? Like, should your game take a year to make? Should I quit my job and go full time and start? I mean, obviously there's personal finances and things, but like, what are a couple, maybe 2 or 3 good starting stones for people who really want to get started, either in creating their own business or creating a game? And that's kind of a difficult question, but.
I definitely think it's starting with the talent. It's trying to figure out where exactly you want to see yourself. Obviously, if you're just starting out, start small. I mean, that's honestly the one advice that no one takes, but is given to everybody, is start small, start horribly small, see if you can actually do something. I mean, a lot of people start in Flash. There's obviously things like Unity nowadays. It all depends on your skill level and your talent. If you're somebody that's coming with no skills as far as game development and you want to get into it, I mean, just look into what it actually takes. If you're someone who's currently in college and you're a software engineer, you're an artist, try to find out what are the pieces that you're going to need to actually start the process. If you're an art, I know a lot of people who are out there trying to start projects and they haven't filled in the pieces. It's, hey, I'm an artist, I'm trying to make this game. I don't have a software developer. Well, you're not going to have a very good time making a game if you don't. But I've also seen the opposite. I mean, with our own company, it started by 2 software professionals. Like, we make software, we're not artists, so we had to find people to do that. As far as starting, again, start small. Figure out what exactly you want to do. I think Flash is a great place to start. That's where I started programming myself. And it sets up a lot of things for you just to get it out there. And it's also one of the more easy to distribute models, since you can just put it up on a website and there it is and anyone can play it. So I personally think that's the best place to start, to at least start gauging your own capabilities and figuring out what exactly the territory is before you go full head deep into it.
Yeah, definitely small. I mean, you said like a year. Like, I would say if you want to make a game, like, put something out in a month. Like, it doesn't, for the app stores now, Google Play in particular, you can pay $25. You get an account, you can upload your game, it's live in an hour. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, it doesn't even have to, if it's terrible and it gets bad reviews, you can just delete it and change the name and upload another one. Like, I mean, you want to get feedback, you want to, I mean, a year-long project when it's new, like, it would be, the most likely scenario is at some point in that year you're going to stop and you're not going to get back to it. So it's just get it out there. And at least I mean, it's better than nothing. You get some feedback, you can learn a little bit, iterate from there. I mean, depending on your financial stuff, like, I actually, game development from an indie side is very hard to, like, support yourself for a living. So I mean, if you don't need to make a lot of money, that can be a great route. It's very exciting, very fulfilling work. But if you have a family to support yourself, support or something like that, I would lean towards the hobby route until you see some success, until you find something that's resonating, and then you can see a safer path towards a sustainable career. But I mean, that's all. I mean, if you're just out of school and you have some time, I mean, it's really fulfilling. It's really exciting. Just having a vision of a product and then creating it and being able to share it with the world. And I mean, like, to the earlier talks, like, how often is something you can create something and 1 million people or 10 million people can play it and experience it? Like, that's never existed in our past here. So that is very fulfilling.
So when we did our expo up in Cleveland, our keynote speaker was Ian Schreiber, who I believe is from Columbus, and he's a game design sort of guru type guy. And so I'll lean on something that he said, which is that in general, 1 out of 100 games is going to be great. So if you want to make a great game, make 100. And the odds are going to be with you. So basically, sit down and start making games. I think you're absolutely right about the talent. Like, you need the pieces. A really great way to find those pieces is game jams. You know, we go. We do the
That's
Global
what
Game
most
Jam every year. We do a couple of the Ludum Dares as well, typically up in Cleveland. I know they do them here as well. And that's a really excellent way not only to meet the community, but also to find out what those pieces are that you're missing. Like if you're an artist, go to a game jam and say, hey, I just had an idea for a game. Does anyone want to help me program it? Who wants to help me make the music? Who wants to help me do, X, Y, and Z? And it's a really great way to your point, to get something done. A game jam, its entire purpose is to get something done as fast as possible.
Yeah.
48 hours from banged bullets. And and I've participated in game jams where the game has actually been put out in front of people, that the following week on the App Store to see see what's going to happen with it. And that's how you really, game design, just like playing the piano or the guitar or painting, it's a muscle that you have to work it out. You know what I mean? Your first game, and obviously I've proven this. Our first big game was Uncle Slam, and like I said, it was not a success. But if that was like, okay, well, I guess I'm not a game designer. No, that's the wrong way to look at it. You have to keep honing the craft. Angry Birds, I know we lean on this, and I'm sure other people have heard this, was the 53rd game that Rovio released. Okay? Most of them before that were moderately successful. They did okay, but it took them 53 tries to get to the one that was like, knock it out of the park. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that you would necessarily have to wait to 53. You might have to wait till 100. But if you keep doing it, the odds are in your favor that you're going to hit something that really works. And like the iteration, like you were talking about, keep going, keep trying. Maybe tweak it a little bit, put it out there, get real customer feedback, real gamers playing your game, and you'll start to see what's working, what's not. I think that's really the best way to go.
Yeah, I think you said a couple interesting things. First of all, I can't recommend like these game jams and stuff enough. Columbus has a bunch. Wherever you're from locally, look at things like tech weekends or the 48-hour gaming groups and whatnot. And a lot of times you can even go to something like that and not know anyone there, and it'll be like the lone artist and the lone programmer, and they just do something for 48 hours and see what it's like. So I think that's really, really important to take advantage of if you're not quite sure where to start.
And we do contests on FTL that are like that too, a 24-hour contest, flash-based, where there'll be a $100 or $200 prize and some other just ancillary stuff. But you get like a theme, so you kind of have a starting point, and it's 24 hours, 48 hours, and it's like that crunch, that motivation. You just get something done, and some of those then go on to be viable game concepts that are developed further and are released and make a good amount of money. And some is just a fun way to learn.
Yeah, one of the sort of best pieces of advice I got a long time ago is, particularly if you're new, find a game that's really simple, something like checkers, or like a game that's already established, so it could be a board game, whatever. A very simple game, and make the best damn version of that game you can using whatever system you want to use. Unity, fool around with Unity. But that will force you, the game's already designed, you don't have to worry about any of the mechanics, you know the rules, so make the best version of that game using whatever system you want to use, just to kind of get a grasp on what you're doing. And you probably won't ever turn checkers into a multi-million-dollar gaming empire, but at least you can work with a team and you can get something established. I think that's really interesting. So a couple of you also tied on this. We're going to jump back to the heavy business end for a minute. Sort of like the age-old question of fundraising versus crowdsourcing versus investors. I don't know if any of you have any light to shed on which way, starting out or dependent on where your business is, what you should be looking for. The OGDE, for example, understands that investment in games in Ohio is pretty limited right now, and that's something we're trying to change. But I don't know if your experience can shed any interesting light on ways to get that initial funding or continual funding.
I can dive in first. So we're actually in the process of raising money right now. Like I said, we went through a business accelerator, and business accelerator gives you what they call seed funding or pre-seed funding. So we got $20,000 to prove out some of the concept, and to we got some initial contracts signed and some market proof in terms of like customers saying that they were interested. But what's interesting is that our particular deal, the first game that we're making, part of the agreement with the board game maker was that we would not use crowdfunding because they use crowdfunding, and they don't particularly want the digital version and the physical version competing for people's attention on crowdfunding sites. So we're sort of forced to go the more traditional route. Right now it's just my partner and I, and neither of us are taking a salary, but we want to get this game out quickly. So we're actually in the process of pitching to investors to try and raise money. I am doing everything I can to not have to go out to California to do it. Mainly because what's interesting about this is when I go out to California and I say we're trying to raise $250,000, they say that's cute. Go back to Ohio. Call me when you need $5 million. It seems crazy, but that's what they say. They say go home and get that from friends and family. But then you come back to Ohio and you say I'm looking for $250,000, and they go, ooh, yeah, you should probably go out to the coast. We don't do that kind of stuff here. But it just shows you the difference in mindset. Here in Ohio, trying to find funding, well, I can't speak to Ohio. In Cleveland, trying to find funding for medical technology, no problem. Even trying to find things for like chemical and even some limited manufacturing is a lot easier. Entertainment, it's like you're speaking Swahili. They have no idea what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. We're working on changing that. There's actually a couple of us in Cleveland that are actively, pounding the pavement, trying to raise money in the gaming space. And I think if we get 1 or 2 wins, it'll start to open up that world. People will start to see, this is a really totally legitimate place to invest money. In that either angel or possibly moving into VC area. If you're not familiar with what those terms mean, just find me afterward. This is all I've been thinking about for the last 3 months, so I have it all in my brain now. But so as a result, we're actually trying to raise. December is the worst month of the year to raise money, I've been told. I'm very excited to hear that because it means I don't get to do anything for the month of December. But this is the important takeaway from this. Through this entire process, we're still working on the game. The idea of I'm going to raise a bunch of money and then start is definitely not the right way to look at it. We signed this contract, we started working on the game, and we're going to keep working on it. I'm going to keep putting my mortgage payment on my Discover card until I can make it happen because I believe in this property and I'm willing to take that risk. Is it a smart risk to take? We'll see. I believe in the property. But, I'm sure you guys can have different stories about crowdfunding or other ways to go.
Yeah, I don't actually have a lot of experience with the funding route of games, at least initially. So, our FTL and my background is more like once you have a game, what do you do with it? How do you make money from it? And from there, once you've had a success and you've been, in contact with one of the many different publishers or companies that license it, then often deals will come about where they'll finance your next game and so forth. But yeah, like if you're just coming in brand new, I would say that the key part of your advice would be don't let it be a barrier to you. Just start making your game and even the funding. You can maybe speak on. I've talked to a lot of people that have done Kickstarters that have failed, and it's a ton of time to go in and make this nice video and create this page and all this stuff. So it's like that's time that you could have been building your game too. So there's a whole balance to everything that may not be the best use of your time depending on what level you're going at. And again, if you're starting from a hobby side, then you don't necessarily need funding, or you don't need it until you have a proof of concept or you have a release of an early version that's showing tangible metrics, then that you can go to people and be like, look, like this is working. If I had this money, then we can really grow it and make it even bigger.
Yeah, I can speak at least from the crowdfunding side of things. I haven't actually seeked or sought any investors of that nature. But as far as the Kickstarter and crowdsourcing goes, it's a wonderful place right now. A lot of people are aware of it. It's been brought to light by a lot of big companies like Double Fine was the big one to kind of break the Kickstarter market. Kickstarter's kind of grown over the past even just 2 years. Before, not a whole lot of people knew about it, and there was a lot of projects on there, but there was still a good amount of attention. Now that Double Fine and a lot of I wouldn't call indie companies, but people who've been in the game industry for a while who don't necessarily want to work for larger corporations but still want to work on their ideas have been getting onto Kickstarter, and it's been growing the popularity of a lot. That's why you get, again, people like Double Fine. Obviously, it's like the Mighty Number 9, the guy who did Mega Man was just on there, and he got $3 million for his project. And there's those people on there, but there still is a lot of room for smaller companies. I think that if you're like as he was saying, if this is your first project, don't get a Kickstarter. Honestly, do a few projects, know exactly where you are, know where your capabilities are, and where you're going. If you're already at that point, my advice there, honestly, would be have something that you've already developed. Have something that you can actually get in the hands of people as just a demo. again, it's like you shouldn't necessarily go into this seeking the money first. I mean, you needed to kind of do things, but even with our own project, I mean, we had to take a lot of our own time. Just while I was working a full-time job, just taking on the side, developing the game so that we could actually do a proof of concept to show people. I mean, crowdsourcing is a really awesome place to get funding, and I think that for a lot of people it can work out for you. But a lot of it ends up coming down to, do you have something that people are interested in, and can you actually prove to them that you know what you're doing? That's very similar to investors, I would at least have to imagine. And in that sense, it honestly works out very similar, except you just don't have one particular person that you have to answer to, but you actually have the whole entire community to answer to, since a lot of them are relying on you to do the project that you said that you did, or you will be doing.
I want to draft off something you just said for a second, because we haven't actually addressed it head on yet, but I think in this setting it makes perfect sense. This idea of what is an indie? Because I think the definition of what an independent game developer is changing a lot these days. At least when I first started thinking about this question, the idea of an independent meant that you weren't working with a big publisher. But the big publishers are probably going to be gone pretty soon. The way that the world is working these days, big publishing of video games, like what were big publishers about? Big publishers are about getting discs printed and shipped to GameStop. That's what a big publisher does. And a lot of the companies now are sort of either taking that in-house with places like Sony, or they're going completely, Wild West with like the app stores. And so this idea of what makes a publisher and what therefore makes an indie really is a question of where the money comes from. It's who is getting a say in what that finished product is going to be. And so now it really more is a question of like, I didn't take any funding or I did crowdfunding. That is like the definition of indie. Whereas if you go out and get an investment from a venture capitalist, you're probably not quite so indie anymore. But if you get it from an angel who loves games, you probably still kind of are indie. So this idea of what an indie is changing a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
And I especially think this is important because, and if I may, I just want to ask this question. Can I get a show of hands? Who here would very much like to or is currently making a salary from building games? Okay. And how many of you have ever been to something like a GDC, a game developer conference out in California? Okay, only a few. So the session that was the first thing this morning, how many of you felt a little bit dirty when he used the word addictive gameplay? That is the exact kind of session you're going to hear at GDC. And it's important that you hear it and it's important that you listen to it, because the best money you'll get is money from customers. We talk about like, let's get money from Kickstarter, let's get money from our fans, let's get money from wherever. But the money that of people paying you to play your game is the best money you'll ever get. And I know that it felt really dirty to me the first time I heard it too, this idea of compulsion loops and whatever. But really, that's what gameplay has always been. We lost it in the middle because we went from arcades, where you only got to play for a while until you put in another quarter, and then we went to this world of home consoles, where it was all of a sudden now you're paying $50 to play a game up front, and that's it. And now we're back to microtransactions, and people are optimizing for that behavior of like, how do we get people to pay? How do we get people to pay? And it's important to remember that gameplay, this is back to what I was talking about earlier about the business and the creative side sort of pulling against each other. To me, what makes an indie is that the creative experience is the most important thing and the money is only just underneath it. The flip of that, the non-indie, is the money is important and the game is how we get to that money. That's the difference for me. Mm-hmm. And so trying to keep those in perfect balance is what I'm always trying to do in terms of, should we go free to play on this? Should we do, some kind of like consumable where people have to, buy 99 cents worth of stuff to keep playing or whatever. It's trying to make that balance work. And if you can do it right, as he was saying in that panel, if you can really do it right, you've got the potential to make a lot of money. And if you can do that, then you won't need to go back to the well to either crowdsource or ask for investment or what have you as you move forward. So.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting thing. There's a lot of talk, for example, like gamification and whatnot is a term that's getting thrown around a lot. But I think it sort of boils down to, for us at MVG, like we look at what our gameplay is, and we're always cognizant of, okay, if this is free to play as opposed to buy outright, how does that change the game? Because the only barriers of playing in your game are put in there by you. So like if you have to do some annoying thing as the customer, like you have to pay 99 cents to be able to unlock something, or a lot of games are just time-based, like you can get there, but it's gonna take you 10 days as opposed to just buying it outright. All of those barriers are introduced by you, the developer. So it's something you need to be very cognizant of, is like, is this a barrier that's adding to the gameplay, or is it just a nuisance so that you can have a microtransaction, an in-app purchase somewhere? And I think that's where that balancing act comes in a lot. So we just have a few more minutes. Oh, did you want to jump in?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, this is actually a conversation that I've had before, and I think one of the things that was definitely brought up, which was a good point, is that I think a lot of people are actually trying to figure out where that balance is right now. Because I've seen a lot of, like, microtransactions is the big thing right now, especially with the mobile market. And there's a lot of games that have gone completely on the side, Candy Crush, just, microtransaction everything you can. And then there's games who have done it more subtly, and it's, I think that where we're going to kind of end up resolving is somewhere more on the side of a little bit more lax than what people are currently doing. But I definitely think there have been some fairly good implementations of it.
Sure.
And
Yeah, I think
and
it's-
you can actually make a game that's fully ad supported and do quite well. I mean, you're basically getting paid by the Candy Crush companies to feed up users that they can then monetize. But I mean, if you don't have to build. I mean, the compulsion loop, or at least I'll say it's simpler, multi-session, just getting someone to open your app up 20, 30, 40 times before they remove it from their phone. That's critical to monetize by ads. But you can make really good money. Like he was saying, the cost of users, 50 cents to 250. Well, you can be the game that's selling that. So I mean, if you show 1,000 ad impressions and you get 3 or 4 people to install Candy Crush, you just made $10. Like that's a totally viable way of monetizing your content, and then you don't have to worry. You're inconveniencing the user with ads, but you don't have to worry about paywalls and a lot more complex types of game design features that come in when you're asking for cash.
Yeah, it'll definitely be very interesting. I mean, now we're seeing this, like you said, this started kind of in the mobile space, but I mean, now in the consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One, there's free-to-play games that, Killer Instinct, you download the game and buy extra characters. Things like Dota and League of Legends have become pretty popular using that sort of model, so it'll be really interesting. And just to sort of tie in the concept of an indie developer, Microsoft released their top 50 names or whatever of recent indie developers for their new system, and Crytek was on there, and I was like, Crytek, seriously? If you would think, but I mean, they are, they're not beholden to a publisher, they're their own entity that funds themselves, but when you think of somebody like indie, you generally don't think Far Cry and Crysis,
Right.
But that's just the way the world is. I think it's a change in the nomenclature more than anything else.
Yeah.
I definitely, someone told me this at one point, which, because there's definitely depending on how you look at it, an independent or indie game developer, there's a lot of different definitions for it. Obviously, there's the more business definition of where you're actually getting your money from, which is, I think, where it started. But then there's a lot of people who, again, you look at Crytek and you're like, that doesn't seem like an indie company to me. And someone ended up explaining it with movies, where the difference between an independent movie and a indie movie. And basically an independent movie would be the more black and white high schooler who ended up taking out a camera and had a very odd shots, and they're trying to do something very creative and artistic. And then you have the indie films, which they seem to have a very large budget for what they're doing, and they end up making things that are a little bit more offbeat than what you might normally expect from some of the larger corporations. And I definitely think that there is room for variation of the terminology there for companies that are not necessarily getting funding from particular sources, but also how much funding they're getting. Because obviously it's again, Starbound actually got released recently on Steam, and I actually had a chance to talk with the creator of that. And I mean, they did horribly well for themselves. Again, like Minecraft, it's like Minecraft was an indie developer, but Notch ended up saying that he doesn't consider himself an indie developer anymore because he's made the most money you could probably ever make on an indie game ever.
For sure.
If anyone's curious, they grossed $42 million on just the iOS version for 2012. Minecraft. In case anyone's curious.
All right, so Minecraft 2, I guess. So I guess we have a few more minutes before we can jump into Q&A. So are there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to expound upon our audience? Anything that we missed before we jump to Q&A? No? Covered it all. All right. Well, if we could turn the house lights up a little bit so we can at least see what's going on, kind of. I don't know where our microphone ran off to. Oh, there it is. So yeah, just if you have a question for any of them, please raise your hand. Cody will bring the mic over to you, and we'll go from there.
As someone who did the Midwest career line and was told, like, games aren't a viable thing, I'm going to be in my end year of law school, and I was just wondering, for you guys, it sounds like FGL's made licensing easier, but what legal problems do smaller developers face that don't have, EA's army of lawyers to, work out any licensing or problems?
Well, from our point of view, like I said, we are going after a very specific, what I consider underserved market. And as a result, it's not sort of, the David and Goliath situation. Like, I'm not approaching Marvel to try and license their property to make a video game. Because if I did, I would get a very short end of that stick. I'm coming sort of as as equals, we're coming together. You're a small independent board game maker, I'm a independent video game maker. Let's make a deal so that everybody can make money. I have a lawyer, they have a lawyer. That's not a team, but I don't know. I think it's really just a question of finding out what is a good fit. Because if you're working at something that is the right fit, it's probably not going to be all that hard. Like I said, if I did decide, I'm this one guy in Cleveland who's got a partner who's in Halifax, and now we're going to fly out to California to try and lock down DC superheroes for a game, that's going to be an uphill battle. But just like we're talking about, start small in terms of the games you're making, start small in terms of the licenses that you're pursuing, if that's the kind of thing you want to do. So the game that we're making is a game called Sentinels of the Multiverse. It's sold probably about 35,000 copies as a board game so far. It's not Settlers of Catan. It's not Carcassonne. It's not selling millions, but it will someday. It's a great game. And so we're trying to get them early. And there's a lot of them out there. So that's, it's not like, we only have one or two people to partner with. There's hundreds of independent game makers out there. So we're not finding it to be a problem.
If you're going to publish your own game, your own IP yourself, then there's really no legal stuff that you have to worry about. That comes into play when you're wanting to license some other kind of IP, or someone else wants to license your game, and then you need to have, and even then, for most of the people that would license your game, they would be fine, just independent US guy, no problem. When you get to the Cartoon Network level companies, then they have a whole sort of list of requirements from insurance and so forth, and then that's where you can use FGL, and we take a small percentage for that type of handling, but then it's very easy for you.
As a small indie, we haven't really had to deal with too much as far as that is concerned. We've certainly had to do NDAs, things like that, when talking with people, figuring out CPAs and figuring out tax stuff. But honestly, the legal side is really not that heavy-handed, at least where we are at this point in time. I think that really ends up coming, again, as these guys were saying, when you start working with the larger corporations.
Yeah, I would also suggest, depending on where you live, I don't know where you live, but in Columbus, for example, we have Tech Columbus, we have the Dublin Entrepreneurial Center. All of these are very indie focused, and if you get a space or any sort of arrangement with them, they can give you access to a lawyer and banking and CPA and all sorts of stuff to kind of get you started. They're not going to be able to help you with everything, but simple NDA, some licensing agreements they can help you out with.
Hi, I currently have a game that I'm developing. It's actually on Steam Greenlight, and I'm also working a full-time job.
What's it called?
Ronnie.
RONNIE.
RONNIE. And I'm also working.
Plug yourself.
Also working a full-time job, which also hinders the time that I have into making my game. Is it possible to be funded to support you and your family while you're making the game full-time? Or am I just stuck, doing everything when I get the chance to, which is very discouraging.
I think that's the big
Yeah, it's possible, sure, but I don't think it would be easy until your game is proven to generate a revenue stream, and then at that point, you almost don't need the funding. if it's going to be making you a lot of money on your own.
Yeah, it's that age-old thing. Like, no one wants to give you a loan when you need the money. They want you to show you don't need the money, and then they're happy to give you a loan. It's exactly the same issue that everybody deals with forever in these things. The best advice I would say for you is probably don't quit your job yet, but look around. Like we've been talking about a number of different ways to find interesting partners, to find talent that can help. And frankly, maybe try and find some money. If depending on what stage your game is at, it may be right for a Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. If you can show compelling gameplay and you can show a really clear way that you're going to be working yourself towards a profitable state, maybe try it. Maybe don't try Kickstarter. Maybe try Indiegogo, which is a little bit have slightly different rules about these sorts of things and is a little bit more of a free-flowing community. Kickstarter is kind of like the big 600-pound gorilla. Indiegogo does a lot of other sort of quirkier types of projects. So that might be, it's going to get you less traction, but they tend to have a different type of a crowd over there. So it might be worth looking. I would say, unlike what I did, because I did quit my job to do this because we were making just enough money to make that a viable thing. But ever since then, now I've been on this roller coaster of having to go and try to find more fundraising as other projects haven't been as successful. So, you just got to be ready to know what's going to happen if you take that route, because plenty of people do it, and there's certainly a number of people out there for whom, I chose to quit my job and live off my credit cards, and if I hadn't have done that, this game never would have gotten done. It depends on how passionate you are. If you're willing to take that risk, then take it, but I wouldn't do it lightly.
Thank you.
One question I had, you touched on this briefly when you said the best money you will ever get is from your customers. And I have to wonder what kinds of games would facilitate that, and also because the other thing I'm also very concerned about, and one thing I don't see, fan clubs. So, for instance, Atlas is a major, they're a major but indie game publisher. They have something called the Atlas Faithful. It's an email list. You have a relationship with people who have already bought from you once. You keep that relationship going. It's awesome. How does that kind of relationship figure into some of the other things that we've been talking about with monetization? Or is maintaining a fan club or is maintaining that relationship so expensive compared to going for like a high turnover model, especially in the mobile space, that people just don't think of that kind of thing? How do you keep in touch with customers who've already bought from
a
you?
passionate fan base is worth more than anything, in my opinion. And especially, like I said, a lot of my thinking about this has pushed me towards this idea of trying to find games that already have a passionate fan base, because they're the easiest people in the world to market to because they already love you. It's your job not to mess it up. It's not your job to convince them to part with their money. It's almost your job to convince them not to part with their money. People who play like for instance, Settlers of Catan is a perfect example. Settlers of Catan has been out for almost 20 years now. I think it came out in like '94, and they've got 20 different versions. They're available on every digital platform, and people who love that game have spent hundreds of dollars on that game because they love it. And if you can build something that people love, continuing to build more things that they love should be an obvious next step. And in terms of just the real nuts and bolts of what you're asking, how do you maintain that relationship? There's so many great tools out there. We use something called MailChimp, which allows you to gather email addresses and just hold them. And it's, I think you can gather 1,500 for free. And once you get bigger than that, then you have to start paying like a monthly fee. But super cheap, super easy, and all you have to do is have that little sign up for a mailing list on your website, or a Facebook fan page would be even cheaper, although that's not quite as direct because it's kind of just in their feed. But there's so many tools out there, Twitter feeds, Facebook, you name it, to stay engaged with those with your fans. The key is to stay engaged with them. So what you're really talking about is an investment of your time. Making sure you don't go 3 months without some kind of a touch point with those people, but also not going so often. Like, these people don't want to hear from you every week, but they might want to hear from you every month. So just, learning from your fan base, having an open dialogue with them, starting a forum on your website for, feedback. the idea of getting just an email, like I've got a support issue, I'm going to write in and say, hey, your game crashed, can I get some help? And doing that one-on-one is great. But if you can open that up for the whole world to see on a forum, that's going to help people who might not have ever emailed you see how your game works, how your process works. Maintaining those relationships are definitely, I'd say that's your number one most important goal when it comes to post-release marketing of something.
I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think the cost is, honestly, the cost is, it's so small you don't even have to think about it. Yeah. And what it does for you is fantastic. I mean, really, it does depend a little bit on the type of game you're making. If you're coming out with like a Flash game every week, obviously you won't see too much people who are a fan base of, usually they're a fan base of a particular game opposed to a particular company. That gets more into just brand recognition. But yeah, having a community, if you have something that people are interested in, having that community is the biggest thing you can do for yourself, because honestly, those are the people, you as one person can only tell so many people about your game who can advertise it. When someone comes up to you and says, hey, I saw this game, it's really cool. Hey, this game's multiplayer, you should pick it up, you should play with me. The more people you can get to do that, the more people you can get passionate about it, the better. And honestly, a lot of you have to do a little bit of your own investment there, but that really comes down to, did you hit something that resonates with the community, and does the community pick it up? Which that can, be a little hit or miss, but again, regardless, that's something that everyone should be striving for.
And you, just real quick, you can even put a tangible value to that, like on mobile. So like if you have a fan base of 5,000 people and you send out an email to everyone saying, hey, I just released a new game, and 2,000 of those people download it and install it, you can take that and compare it against paid user acquisition where you're paying $1.50 per install. And that email blast just was worth $3,000 of promotional stuff. So when you come to look at how you allocate your time and what it's worth, it's a direct reach to your customers, fans, even better, definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm going to just jump in because I can. But I think that the way, and I'm not saying anything about the way you necessarily phrased it, but I think a lot of times the way it's looked at is like, so the jobs are generally community management, right? Like you're managing the community, but that's really not the right perception. Like this is a community that loves what you're doing. You should want to be a part of them, and you should want to foster that community. So by being engaged and seeing them as like a part of what you're doing, it doesn't, obviously there's a time investment, but it's not like you're like, oh God, I gotta go meet these people. Like they should be a group that you're really interested in having involved with what you're doing. I don't know where we're at I think we got time for one more. Well, we're gonna do one more anyway, so. Whoever Cody chooses. Oh, there it is.
I know we discussed like the Kickstarters, angel investors, and like venture capitalism, like with just investing. Do you know if there are any government assistance programs or any like tax credits for developers or for businesses that actually develop software video games?
I can speak to this at least a little bit. You guys might know more. I personally looked into this at least briefly because that is an avenue that does exist. Personally, as far as government, I haven't found anything in particular. There are tax credits that certain states will actually give you. It ends up falling under entertainment market. Those are normally made for movies, and at least for myself, at least at the level that I'm working at, I found none of them applicable. Normally because they end up giving you tax credits depending on a minimum amount of money that you actually end up putting into it. At least from what I found, most of the tax credits, at least in Ohio specifically, I think are something like you have to at least invest $2 million into a project of some sort before they'll actually give you specific tax credits. I don't know if you guys can speak any more about.
Well, I will say this: the idea of alternative sources of funding are an important thing to look into. Whether it's maybe it's not definitively a tax credit, but one of the examples that's happening in Cleveland is that one of my cohorts who's trying to raise money discovered that his game concept was really hitting interestingly in autistic kids, and so he's now pursuing that avenue of like, I wonder if there's some autistic education funding or any of those sorts of things. So, don't be afraid to look outside the box when it comes to what you're looking for funding. There's not just the 4 that we listed here. There's angels who are, it's like, I played games, I love games, I made $1 million, selling widgets, and now I want to invest in a video game. That's one way to do it, but there's hundreds of other ways of finding that sort of funding. My partner, as I said, is in Halifax, Canada, and Halifax actually has the ability to put some money in. Like, they actually brought and did a booth at GDC. Like, look at how great Halifax is. We're going to be doing video game stuff, and so he's helped a little bit on that side of things. But there's always Ohio's got a lot of money. Is what it really boils down to. Ohio has got a lot of money. The trick is trying to get these people to understand that they made all their money over the last 100 years, and now it's time to open those up and start putting it back into Ohio. Because we're never going to be we're never going to be a huge manufacturing base again. That's just not the way that the world is going to work. We need these people to start to understand that the information economy, the digital economy, the games economy, this is where things are going. And if they want to be on the leading edge of it, it's time to start reinvesting. So that was a bit of a soapbox moment at the end.
No, it's really important. Most people don't realize that the game industry is larger than music and movies combined.
Yep.
In terms of revenue, I mean that's
something like the last 8 out of 10 biggest entertainment releases were games.
Yeah.
Like Halo, Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto 5 was the single largest best-selling product. Single product. I think just in response, I don't know if our Canadian neighbors are here, but the Canadian government does offer some funding through what their equivalent of the National Endowment for the Arts is. But tying into what you guys say, you'd be surprised if you're developing a game and that technology can also be used in a different industry. There are tax credits and funding available. One of the booth spaces that we have, YEI Technologies, who I encourage you to go use their technology if you haven't yet. Their technology started in robotics. They were looking for robotic stabilization, and then they found out that we can do motion capture and virtual reality with this technology. So yeah, keep your mind open. There's a lot going on. I would like to thank Jeremy, Adam, and Chase for joining us here. So let's give them a round of applause.